Tonight's dinner is baked crouton chicken, butternut squash risotto, and green beans. And I know at first glance it might seem like this meal is quite a lot of work for just a weeknight dinner. But the way I make it, it's really pretty simple and doesn't take that much time at all. Here's how I make it. First thing I'm going to do is get the oven started. I'm going to set that at 425 degrees. I'm going to start out by making the breading for the chicken, and that is going to consist of these seasoned croutons. Any decent croutons are going to have a significant amount of seasoning and oil in the croutons. And all that needs to be done is to pour some of them into a food processor and grind them up into a powder, and you got yourself a perfectly seasoned breading. Now you could use panko breadcrumbs or any other kind of breadcrumbs and try to get the seasoning right and try to get the oil mixture right, but this just seems to be a foolproof breading every single time. Next, I'm going to prepare the pan for the chicken. I'm just going to use a big aluminum sheet pan here, and I'm going to line it with parchment paper. I find that parchment paper is superior to aluminum foil in almost every single way for cooking in the oven. I almost never put aluminum foil underneath anything anymore. It's going to be parchment paper underneath, and I'll use aluminum foil for putting over top of things when I need to. But this provides the perfect non-stick surface so your chicken won't stick to the pan. The chicken I'm going to be using for this recipe tonight are chicken breast tenderloins. This is that little piece of meat that kind of hides inside the chicken breast under the main outer part of the meat of the chicken breast. Obviously, you could use whole chicken breasts and cut them into smaller pieces like this, or chicken thighs would work good as well. And I'm just going to start coating these chicken pieces with those crouton crumbs that we created earlier. I have dried off the chicken a little bit, but I do want the chicken to be a little bit wet. I don't need it to be completely dry. It helps if it's a little bit wet so the croutons will stick to the meat. I don't do any dipping of the meat in egg or milk or anything else really. I find that the crouton crumbs stick just fine without any help. But the key to this is to take some crumbs from the bottom and bring it up to the top and then pack them down onto the meat with my fingertips. And then instead of shaking that excess off, I just keep that piece of meat horizontal and leave that layer on there. That's going to be our nice, crispy, flavorful crust on top. We're not going to need to flip these in the oven or anything like that. Once we put these on the pan, that's how they're going to stay until we serve them up. Sometimes after I've got all the chicken pieces on the pan, I'll even go in and add some more crumbs onto each little piece and make little piles of these crumbs on the top. But this goes pretty quick. As you can see, I'm making quite a few pieces here because we like leftovers in our house. And in the 425 oven, those go. Those are going to cook in the oven for a full 30 minutes. So now I'm going to start working on the risotto. I'm going to start off with an onion. I've got a half a red onion here left over from the night before. I'm just going to go ahead and use this. Obviously, any onion would be fine. My wife did comment that the risotto was pretty oniony when we ate it later, so depending on how oniony you want your risotto, you may want to go with only a quarter of an onion here. But a half an onion makes a pretty oniony flavor, which I like. Or you could just leave them out entirely if you're not an onion person. Next up is the butternut squash. These come in all different kind of shapes and sizes. This is what I would probably call a medium-sized squash. But for this recipe, I do look for a butternut squash that is in the medium to small size range. I want there to be plenty of butternut squash in this risotto, but the real star of the show is the rice, so I don't want the risotto to be taken over by the butternut squash. But like I said, I think this one's about a medium size is what I would classify it. And I'm just going to cut the ends off and then go vertically from top to bottom with my knife there and get that skin off. A vegetable peel would work for this too, but the skin is pretty thick on a butternut squash, so you'd probably have to go over it with maybe 2 passes with a vegetable peeler. Once the skin is removed, it's time to slice it in half, and we need to carve out those seeds in the middle, and a teaspoon is the perfect tool for that. I find it best to just go slow with this and take your time to get the seeds out. If you start getting in a hurry, you'll start flinging seeds everywhere, and you'll just end up making a mess, so I like to take my time on this little task. And I'm going to cut up this squash into pretty small pieces. First, I'm going to cut them into kind of French fry type shapes that are probably about 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch. And then, of course, cut them into cubes here. So I've got about 1/4 inch cubes. I want them to be pretty small. The main reason for cutting them small is so that they'll cook in a reasonable amount of time. Great big chunks of squash will just take a long time to cook. And I want to make sure this squash is thoroughly cooked when the rice is done cooking as well. And here's the arboreal rice. This is the traditional rice used to make risotto, and it's got a higher starch content than regular rice, which is why it's used mainly for this dish. But you can make risotto with regular rice too. I've done that, but this will give you a little bit better result. Since this is a 12-ounce package, I'm just going to dump out 1 cup because we don't need the full package for our dinner tonight. And since I've got 1 cup rice, I'm going to go with 2 cups water. And I'm going to add some bouillon into that water. So I've got 1 cup rice and 2 cups chicken broth. And I like this powder kind of bouillon. I'm not a fan of those pre-wrapped cubes. And that liquid stock you buy at the store just doesn't seem to have any flavor at all. So this is my preferred way to make chicken stock. So I'm going to dump those onions and squash pieces into an oiled saucepan on medium-high heat. Give those a stir just to get some of that oil mixed around on all those vegetables. And I'm going to put the lid on just to hold in the heat for the next few minutes and just kind of bring up the heat of everything and get those things going. We're not doing any browning here, just bringing all the vegetables up to temperature. So after about 5 minutes, those onions and squash have kind of come up to temperature and they're starting to cook a little bit. And I'm going to give those a stir, and I'm going to add in that cup of arborio rice. I'm going to give that a mix real quick, and then I'm going to add all 2 cups of that stock that I made earlier, all at once. And I know this is not the traditional way to make risotto by adding all the liquid at once, but this is the easy part that I was talking about. And trust me, the result is going to be just as good. With traditional risotto recipes, you'll find that they say you're supposed to stand there and continually stir and continually add stock as the rice absorb it, just 1 spoonful at a time, and just continually basically babysit this for an entire 30 minutes until it's ready. And who has time for that? This method is much simpler with a very similar end result. We're only going to stir the risotto every 10 minutes or so. We're just going to leave the lid on. Once that starts bubbling, then I'm going to go ahead and give it 1 more little stir, and I'm going to turn that burner down from medium-high down to medium, so we don't want it to burn. And here we are after 10 minutes. As you can see, a lot of the liquid has been absorbed, but it's still pretty wet. Just going to give it a little stir. Lid goes back on. And while that's cooking, I'm going to grate up some Parmesan cheese. This is my preferred tool for doing this. This is a microplane, but obviously you can use a regular cheese grater as well. Or a vegetable peeler works pretty good too for getting some thin slices of hard cheeses like Parmesan. But this microplane creates some really thin shavings of this hard Parmesan cheese, and it's just really airy, and it really melts great in things, and it's going to melt really great in our risotto. But like I said, shavings with a vegetable peeler will work just fine too. And I'm going to add just a little bit of water back into my measuring cup that I had my stock in, and we're going to use that at the end just to fine-tune this risotto. So here we are 20 minutes in. As you can see, it's starting to dry out a little bit. The rice has absorbed almost all the liquid, and I'm going to add some more liquid now. All in all, I probably added back another about ½ cup here, and the lid goes back on. And while that's happening, I'm going to throw some green beans in some boiling water. Those take about 10 minutes to boil. And 10 more minutes later here, we're at 30 minutes total time, and as you can see, almost all the liquid is absorbed again. And I know what you're thinking, that doesn't look like risotto, and you're right, but it will in a second. I'm going to add that grated Parmesan cheese and about another ½ cup of the broth liquid. I'm going to give that a good mix up, add a little bit of pepper. I'm not going to add any salt because that cheese is really salty. And I'm just going to keep on stirring while that rice absorbs that extra ½ cup of liquid that I just poured in. And as I'm stirring, I'm just going to be observing the consistency and seeing if it's looking creamy enough or too dry or too wet. And this is the part where you just add a little bit of liquid at a time over the course of the next, 3-4 minutes or so until you get that consistency fine-tuned to exactly the way you want it. So instead of spending an entire 30 minutes standing there adding liquid a little bit at a time, just do it for the last 3 or 4 minutes at the end, and you really just get an excellent result. And here's our crouton crusted chicken. As you can see, the breading has browned up nicely on all the top and sides, and the underside is browned as well. You get some good browning with that parchment paper. And with this crouton crust, there's no additional seasoning needed. The seasoning that was on those croutons is already the perfect amount of seasoning. Gives this chicken a lot of flavor. And that crouton coating really sealed in that chicken. That's some moist chicken in there. You'll see that in a minute here when I plate it up. So here is the crispy crouton chicken, the rich and creamy butternut squash risotto, and there's some fresh boiled green beans. As you can see, the chicken is tender and juicy on the inside, and it's crispy and flavorful on the outside. So that's my recipe for crouton chicken with butternut squash risotto and green beans. I hope you found that useful. Thanks for watching. I appreciate it. See you on the next one.